The night sky above the private runway was clear, filled with shining stars. A long line of black cars arrived, each one carrying powerful men in expensive suits. They were there for one man, the billionaire Richard Kane. His jet, painted silver and gold, stood like a symbol of his power. Cameras flashed from a distance, and news reporters whispered about the deal he was about to make. But inside the hangar, where only his closest people were allowed, something was wrong. Very wrong. Richard Kane had built an empire on speed, money, and control. He was not used to delays, not used to failures, and never used to hearing the word impossible. Tonight was supposed to be smooth. He had promised the world that his newest deal would change the future of technology, and he needed his private jet to take him there. But as the engines roared to life, they coughed, shook, and died. A silence heavier than thunder filled the air. His pilot rushed down the steps, pale-faced, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Sir, the engine is out. We can't take off. It's not safe." Richard's jaw tightened. "Get it fixed. Now." His voice cut through the air like steel. Within minutes, the best mechanics money could buy were called. They came running in, men with years of experience, top engineers from the city, even specialists flown in from another state. Each one bent under the giant wings, pulled out tools, checked circuits, and whispered to each other nervously. Sparks flew, wires twisted, and yet, every attempt ended the same way. The jet roared for a second, then coughed and died. Outside the hangar, journalists waited like hungry wolves. Every minute of delay was another story, another rumor. "Maybe Kane isn't as powerful as he looks," one of them muttered. "What good is all his money if he can't even fly?" The whispers spread fast, and soon Richard's rivals would hear them too. Richard stood with his arms crossed, watching, his face calm but his eyes burning. For him, this was more than a broken machine. It was his pride, his reputation, his throne. If the jet did not fly, his empire would look weak. And weakness was something Richard Kane could never allow. Hours passed. Mechanics wiped grease off their hands, shaking their heads. "We've tried everything, sir," one said softly. "It's beyond repair tonight." The words hit Richard like a blade. Beyond repair? That phrase did not exist in his world. He dismissed them with a single glare. "You are all fired," he growled. Guards rushed forward to push the failing engineers out. He walked alone to the nose of the jet, his reflection staring back from the polished metal. For the first time in years, Richard Kane felt powerless. He pressed his hand against the cold surface and whispered, "You cannot fail me tonight." And that was when he noticed her. Through the chain-link fence that surrounded the far edge of the runway, a figure stood silently. A young girl, clothes torn, hair messy, eyes sharp as glass. She was just another homeless wanderer, one of the many who lived in the shadows of his empire. She should not have been near the runway. She had no place among men of power and wealth. Yet her gaze was fixed on the broken jet with an intensity that unsettled him. A guard spotted her and stormed forward. "Hey! You! Move away!" He shook the fence hard, but the girl did not flinch. Instead, she leaned closer, her lips moving. Richard could not hear her at first, but as the wind shifted, her voice carried across. "I can fix that," she whispered. The guard laughed angrily. "Fix what? You don't even belong here." He reached for his radio. But Richard raised a hand. His eyes narrowed, curiosity flickering for just a second. He walked closer, his footsteps echoing across the empty runway. The girl straightened her back, meeting his gaze without fear. "What did you say?" Richard's voice was calm, dangerous, the kind of tone that made even millionaires shake. The girl did not look away. Her voice was soft but steady. "I said I can fix your jet." For a moment, silence. Then the guard burst into laughter. "Sir, she's nobody. Just a street rat. She doesn't even have shoes." Richard ignored him. He kept his eyes on the girl. She looked thin, her hands dirty, her face tired. But there was something in her eyes, something no ordinary wanderer carried: confidence. A fire, small but unshakable. "You?" Richard finally asked. "You think you can do what the best engineers in the country could not?" The girl nodded once. No hesitation. Yes. It was absurd. It was insulting. Yet, something about her voice made the air heavier. Richard studied her for a long time, his mind at war with itself. This was madness. Trusting a homeless girl with $1 billion jet? His reputation was already hanging by a thread. If she touched the jet and failed, it would be the end of his name. But if she was right, if she truly could fix it. The sound of reporters shouting outside reminded him of the clock ticking. He had no time left. Pride or risk, he had to choose. Richard Kane leaned in closer to the fence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why should I believe you?" The girl held his gaze, her eyes shining under the runway lights. "Because I see what they don't. And because I don't need your money. I just need a chance." Something inside him shifted. For the first time that night, Richard Kane felt the sharp edge of curiosity pierce through his anger. He turned his head slightly, watching the jet, then back to her. The billionaire's jet was broken. His ego was shattered. But standing on the other side of that fence was a girl with nothing to lose and everything to prove. And deep inside, Richard Kane knew his night was only just beginning. The night had grown colder, but the heat inside the hangar only grew sharper. Billionaire Richard Kane stood like a statue, his sharp suit untouched by the chaos around him, yet his mind boiling with thoughts. The world's eyes were on him, and his jet, the symbol of his unstoppable power, lay silent and broken. Every mechanic he trusted had failed him. Every second that passed was another crack in his iron reputation. But his thoughts were not on the useless engineers or the whispering crowd outside. His eyes kept drifting back toward the fence. Toward her. The homeless girl had not moved. She stood there with her hands gripping the steel wires, her face lit faintly by the glowing runway lights. She did not look away when Richard's gaze found her again. She was small, thin, with clothes that spoke of hunger and nights without shelter. And yet, there was nothing weak about the way she stood. She looked at the jet as though she had known it all her life, as though she carried secrets no one else could see. Richard felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: doubt. Not doubt in her, but in himself. Could it be possible that everyone had overlooked something so simple? That this broken girl saw what millions of dollars in training had not? The thought was madness, and yet it would not leave him. His guards did not share his hesitation. One of them stomped over to the fence, waving his flashlight at her. "I told you, get lost. This is private property." But Richard raised a hand, stopping him. The guard froze mid-step, confused, but he obeyed. Nobody questioned Richard Kane's orders, no matter how strange. Richard walked closer, his polished shoes tapping against the concrete, echoing in the vast hangar like drums of war. He stopped only a few feet from the fence. The girl straightened, pushing her tangled hair back from her face. Her eyes met his again, steady, calm, unshaken. "You think you can fix my jet?" His voice was low, but it carried the weight of a storm. The girl nodded. Yes. Richard studied her for a long time. "What makes you so sure?" Her lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. "Because I already know what's wrong." His chest tightened. Those words cut deeper than any engineer's excuses. "Explain," he demanded. The girl's eyes flicked toward the jet. "Your engine is fine. The problem isn't power, it's timing. The systems aren't speaking to each other. Everyone here is pulling at parts, but no one is listening to the machine." Her words were strange, simple, yet they carried a rhythm, like someone who spoke from experience. Richard tilted his head. "And how do you know that?" For the first time, she broke eye contact. She looked down at her hands, then back up. "Because I've heard that sound before. A long time ago." Richard's heartbeat slowed, then quickened. There was something in the way she said it, something personal, something hidden. He wanted to ask more, but he stopped himself. This was not the time for her story. This was about his jet. His pride. The guard beside him scoffed loudly. "Sir, she's playing you. She doesn't know a wrench from a wheel. Let me throw her out before she causes trouble." Richard's gaze flicked to the guard like the edge of a blade. "Touch her, and you're finished." The man swallowed hard and stepped back. Richard turned back to the girl. "What is your name?" She hesitated, as if the question itself was heavy. "Emily." "Emily," Richard repeated softly, tasting the name, weighing it. "If I gave you the chance, if I opened those gates and let you touch my jet, what would you do?" Emily's answer came without pause. "I'd fix it." The billionaire's chest rose and fell slowly. It was absurd. It was insane. Every part of his brain told him to walk away, to ignore this foolishness and call another team from another city. But his instincts, those same instincts that had built his empire, whispered something different. They whispered that this girl was not lying. For the first time that night, Richard Kane let out a sharp breath and made his choice. He turned to his men. "Open the gate." The guards stared at him in shock. One of them dared to protest. "Sir, this is reckless. If the media sees." Richard's glare silenced him instantly. "I said open it." With stiff movements, the guard unlocked the small service gate in the fence. The metal screeched as it swung wide. Emily stepped forward slowly, almost cautiously, as though she herself could not believe what was happening. She crossed the threshold, and suddenly she was no longer a stranger watching from the shadows, she was inside Richard Kane's world. She walked past the guards who glared at her with suspicion, past the luxury cars lined along the hangar walls, past the engineers packing up their useless tools. Every eye followed her, every whisper buzzing like angry bees. But Emily did not flinch. She kept her gaze locked on the silver jet, her steps steady, her face calm. Richard watched her carefully. He had seen men break under pressure, had watched rivals fall apart under his stare. But this girl, this nobody, carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. When she finally reached the jet, she stopped and placed her hand against the cool metal skin of the machine. For a moment, she closed her eyes, as if listening. Then she whispered, almost too soft to hear, "I know you." Richard's brows pulled together. Was she talking to the jet? Emily turned back to him, her eyes shining. "I'll need tools." "Not all of them. Just the basics. A torque wrench, diagnostic scanner, some insulated wire." One of the engineers laughed from the side. "She doesn't even know what she's asking for. This is ridiculous." But Richard raised a finger, silencing him. "Get her what she needs." The men hesitated, but his command was law. Tools were brought forward, laid out on a table. Emily's hands shook only once when she picked up the first wrench. Then, as she tightened her grip, her movements changed. Her posture straightened, her face sharpened, her hands steady as stone. Richard's heart thudded once, hard. He recognized the look. It was the look of someone stepping into their arena, someone born for what they were about to do. The hangar grew silent. All eyes on her. And Richard Kane, billionaire, king of steel and speed, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The hangar was so quiet that even the sound of Emily's breathing could be heard. She stood before the jet, her hand on the smooth silver surface, as if the machine itself was alive. Around her, the billionaire's guards, engineers, and staff shifted uncomfortably, exchanging doubtful glances. Nobody believed in her. Nobody except Richard Kane. Richard himself stood with his arms crossed, watching her every move. He was a man who trusted numbers, results, and strength. Yet tonight, he was placing his trust in something far stranger, a homeless girl with nothing but confidence in her eyes. His empire was at risk, his pride already wounded, and still he gave her this chance. It wasn't logic that made him agree. It was instinct, and his instincts had never failed him before. Emily moved toward the table of tools. Her thin fingers brushed over the wrenches, the wires, the scanner. She selected them carefully, like a musician choosing the right notes. Then she crawled under the jet, the shadows swallowing her. Sparks flew briefly as she adjusted wires, then silence again. One of the dismissed engineers muttered from a corner, "This is a waste of time. She doesn't even know the system design. She'll make it worse." Richard turned his head slowly, his cold eyes landing on the man. "You already failed me. Do not speak again." The man froze, his words dying in his throat. Inside the shadows of the jet, Emily's voice carried out softly. "I need the scanner connected to the cockpit." The staff hesitated. No one wanted to obey her. But Richard stepped forward, his voice like a blade. "Do as she says." The guards exchanged nervous glances, then moved to the cockpit, following her instructions. The scanner beeped, numbers flickering across its small screen. Emily slid out from under the jet, her hands covered in grease, her face calm and focused. She studied the readings, her lips moving silently as she calculated. Richard found himself watching her closely, searching for signs of fear, of hesitation. But she showed none. She moved like someone who had done this 1,000 times before, like someone who belonged in a world far different from the streets outside the fence. Finally, she stood up straight, holding a bundle of wires in her hand. "The synchronization module is failing. Your engines aren't listening to each other. That's why they keep choking." The chief mechanic scoffed loudly. "Impossible. We already checked the module. Everything tested fine." Emily met his scorn with calm certainty. "You tested the hardware. But the problem is in the timing sequence. It's off by a fraction of a second. Just enough to kill the system." The man laughed bitterly. "You expect us to believe you can solve what entire teams of experts couldn't?" Emily's eyes flicked to Richard, not to the mechanic. "I don't expect you to believe me. I only ask for time." Richard's gaze was locked on her, and in that moment, the weight of his decision pressed hard against him. This was it. If he allowed her to go further, he was staking everything, his flight, his deal, his pride, on a girl who had nothing. And yet, as he studied her, he saw something rare. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't begging for money. She was certain. For Richard Kane, certainty was worth more than gold. "You have 1 hour," Richard said finally, his voice echoing through the hangar. "No more." Emily nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. She bent down, pulled open a small panel beneath the jet, and began her work. Her hands moved quickly, cutting wires, stripping insulation, reconnecting circuits. Every movement was precise, like she had done this 1,000 times. Richard watched, his mind circling around a question he couldn't shake: who was this girl? How could someone from the streets know more than his army of engineers? There had to be a story buried inside her, something painful, something powerful. But tonight was not the time to ask. Tonight was about results. Minutes turned into nearly an hour. Sweat trickled down Emily's face, her hair sticking to her forehead. She pushed herself harder, ignoring the whispers around her. The staff murmured doubts, the guards exchanged uneasy glances, and even the mechanics snorted in disbelief. But through it all, Richard's gaze never left her. At last, Emily crawled out from beneath the jet and wiped her greasy hands on her worn jeans. She looked exhausted, but there was fire in her eyes. She faced Richard and said, "It's ready." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Richard stepped forward slowly. "You're certain?" Emily nodded once. "Start the engines." For a moment, silence. The mechanics exchanged worried looks. One of them leaned close to Richard and whispered urgently, "Sir, if she's wrong, we could damage the system beyond repair. It'll cost millions." Richard didn't even look at him. His eyes were locked on Emily. He could see the weight of her life written in her face, the struggles, the hunger, the nights in the cold. And yet, beneath all that, she stood tall. She had nothing to gain here, and nothing to lose. That kind of certainty was priceless. Richard lifted his hand and signaled to the pilot. "Start the engines." The pilot swallowed nervously, climbed into the cockpit, and began the sequence. Everyone in the hangar held their breath as the jet hummed to life. The engines roared, louder, stronger than before. For a few seconds, it seemed like nothing had changed. Then, the sound leveled. The coughs were gone. The roar was smooth, steady, alive. The jet was breathing again. Gasps filled the hangar. Mechanics stared in disbelief, shaking their heads. The guards looked at one another with wide eyes. Even the pilot's voice cracked with shock over the radio. "Engines are stable, sir. All systems green." Richard's lips curled into the faintest smile. For the first time that night, victory was his again. He turned his gaze back to Emily. She was not smiling, not celebrating. She simply stood there, breathing hard, watching the jet as if she had always known it would work. The billionaire stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. "How did you know?" Emily looked at him, her eyes distant, shadowed by memories. "Because once, a long time ago, I built something like this. And I lost it." Her words sent a shiver down Richard's spine. He wanted to ask her everything, who she was, what she had lost, why she was here, but the sound of the jet's engines filled the air, reminding him that tonight was not about questions. Tonight was about faith. Richard Kane, the man who trusted no one, had placed his empire in the hands of a homeless girl. And she had not failed him. But as he stared at her, standing there in the glow of the roaring engines, he knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The roar of the jet filled the night air, shaking the walls of the hangar, echoing across the empty runway. It was alive again, running smooth, steady, like the heart of a giant beast that had just woken up. For Richard Kane, it was more than just an engine starting, it was his reputation breathing again, his pride restored. He had trusted a girl with nothing, a stranger from the shadows, and she had done what no expert could. The impossible was now possible. The staff stared at her as though she had performed a miracle. The engineers who had mocked her were silent, their pride broken. The guards who had doubted her shifted uneasily, suddenly unsure of their own judgment. Even the pilot, still sitting inside the cockpit, looked down through the glass at her with wide, astonished eyes. But Emily didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She stood there quietly, grease still on her hands, sweat dripping down her face, her eyes fixed on the silver jet as though it was something personal. To her, this wasn't just a machine she had fixed. It was something deeper, something that touched old memories she had tried to bury. Richard Kane noticed it. He was a man who had built his empire by reading people, by seeing the truth hidden in their faces. And right now, in Emily's eyes, he saw a storm. She wasn't just proud of her work, she was carrying something heavy, something painful. The jet's engines were cut, and silence slowly returned to the hangar. Reporters outside shouted questions, their voices muffled by distance and walls. Inside, however, the air was tense. Everyone waited for Richard's response. Would he laugh at the experts, reward the girl, punish the doubters? His next move would decide everything. Richard stepped forward, his polished shoes echoing against the concrete floor. He stopped only a few feet away from Emily. For a long moment, he didn't speak. His cold eyes studied her, searching deeper, trying to understand. Then, in a calm but commanding voice, he asked, "Who are you?" The words were simple, but they struck like thunder. Everyone turned toward Emily, waiting. She swallowed hard, her fingers twisting around the wrench she still held. For the first time since she had walked through the fence, she looked uncertain. "I told you," she said quietly. "My name is Emily." Richard shook his head slowly. "That's not what I asked. I don't want the name you give strangers. I want the truth. No ordinary girl from the streets walks in here and does this. Not unless she has a past." Emily's breath caught. She looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. She wanted to stay silent. She wanted to keep the walls around her story unbroken. But his voice, his stare, his presence, it was like he could see through the lies she hadn't even spoken. The staff leaned closer, curious. The hangar seemed to shrink, all attention pressing down on her. Finally, Emily lowered her eyes and whispered, "I wasn't always on the streets." Richard tilted his head. "Go on." Her voice trembled, but only for a moment. Then it grew steady, like a wound reopening but bleeding with honesty. "I was once the youngest student in a private aviation academy. I built my first model engine when I was 12. By 16, I was working on systems that could change how planes fly. People said I was a genius. My parents, they believed it too." She stopped, her breath shaking. The room was silent, the words hanging heavy in the air. Richard's eyes sharpened, but he said nothing. Emily's gaze drifted back to the jet, as if the machine itself was listening. But life doesn't care about talent. It doesn't care about dreams. One night, on our way back from the academy, there was an accident. A truck driver fell asleep. Our car flipped. My father died instantly. My mother, she held on for a while, but the hospital bills swallowed everything. I was 17 when she was gone. I had no family left. No money. Nothing. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she held her ground. The staff shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their eyes. Even the guards who had mocked her looked away. For a moment, Emily was no longer just a homeless girl with grease-stained hands. She was a tragedy in flesh and bone. Richard, however, did not look away. His gaze stayed locked on her, sharper than ever. "And your academy?" he asked. Emily let out a hollow laugh. "They called me a prodigy when I was useful. But when I couldn't pay, I was just another problem. They erased my name from their records. The girl who was supposed to change the world became a ghost." She paused, then added bitterly, "Ghosts don't need planes. They just need a place to sleep." Her words sliced through the air, raw and unpolished. Richard Kane, billionaire, stood in silence. His empire was built on power and control, but in that moment he saw something stronger in front of him. A girl who had lost everything, yet still carried enough strength to stand here, to fix his jet, to face him without fear. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then, Richard spoke, his tone softer than anyone expected. "You should have been more than this." Emily looked at him, confused. He continued, his voice low but filled with something almost like respect. "The world wastes people like you. It chews them up, spits them out, and calls it order. But you," he gestured toward the jet, "you just proved you're not finished yet." Her chest tightened. For years, all she had heard were words of dismissal, rejection, pity. But these words felt different. They didn't heal, but they didn't wound either. They lit something faint inside her. The staff around them were stunned. Nobody had ever heard Richard Kane speak like that, not to his partners, not to his rivals, and certainly not to a girl from the streets. But the moment did not last long. The sound of reporters outside grew louder. The clock was still ticking. Richard's deal, his empire, his future, all of it still depended on what happened next. He stepped back, regaining his usual sharpness. "You've proven yourself tonight, Emily. But this isn't over. The jet is fixed, yes. But the question now is, can I trust you beyond this hangar?" Emily's eyes widened slightly. "Trust me?" Richard's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "I don't give second chances often. You fixed my machine. Now I want to know if you can fix something far more complicated, my flight, my deal, my image. If you stay, you'll face eyes sharper than mine, and enemies who'd love to see you fail. If you walk away, you'll go back to the streets, and this night will mean nothing." The choice hung heavy in the air. The girl who had been nobody was being offered something no one could have imagined. Not a gift. Not pity. But a test. Emily's heart pounded. She thought of her parents, of the nights she slept under bridges, of the laughter of mechanics who mocked her as she wandered airports hoping for scraps of work. She thought of the jet, the sound, the roar, the life in it. And she thought of Richard Kane, a man who had everything yet looked at her as if she still mattered. Her voice came steady, clear. "I'll stay. Richard nodded once, his expression unreadable. But deep in his cold eyes, a spark flickered. He turned to his guards. "Prepare the jet. We leave in 30 minutes. As the staff scrambled into action, Emily stood there, still holding the wrench. Her world changed forever. She had stepped into the billionaire's world by accident. But now, she was no longer just fixing a machine. She was fixing her own future. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the real test had only just begun. The night sky stretched endless above the runway, a dark sea with stars scattered like diamonds. The silver jet stood tall in the glow of floodlights, no longer broken, no longer silent. It hummed quietly, alive again. Guards moved quickly, checking the perimeter. Staff loaded luggage, files, and crates of importance. Every person in the hangar worked with the energy of soldiers preparing for battle. And at the center of it all stood Richard Kane and Emily. For Richard, this moment was more than just a journey to his deal. It was about proving to the world that he could never be slowed, never be broken. Reporters outside were waiting for a story of failure, but what they would see instead was triumph. And for Emily, this was not just about a machine she had fixed. It was her first step away from the streets, away from being invisible. Tonight, she was part of something she thought she had lost forever. Richard glanced at her as she stood near the jet, still holding the wrench she had refused to put down. Her clothes were torn, her hands dirty, her hair a mess. She looked nothing like the powerful people who usually walked beside him. Yet, in her eyes, there was a strength he respected. He had seen millionaires with less courage. The guards, however, weren't so accepting. Two of them stepped close to Richard. One leaned in and whispered, "Sir, are you sure about this? She's unpredictable. What if she damages the jet in the air? What if she's lying about who she is?" Richard didn't even turn his head. His voice was calm but sharp. "You all saw what she did tonight. If she wanted to harm us, she could have done it already. She stays." The guards looked uneasy but obeyed. Nobody questioned Richard Kane when his mind was set. The engines began to warm again, their low growl filling the hangar. Lights blinked across the wings. The smell of fuel drifted through the air. The moment had come. Richard turned to Emily. His face was unreadable, his tone steady. "You're coming with me." Emily blinked, startled. "With you? On the flight?" "Yes," Richard said firmly. "You didn't just repair a jet. You saved more than a machine tonight. I don't leave people like that behind." Her heart thudded in her chest. For years, she had watched planes take off from behind fences, dreaming of being inside, dreaming of belonging to that sky again. And now, this man, this billionaire who could have chosen anyone, was offering her the chance. She nodded slowly. "All right." Richard's lips curved faintly, almost like a smile. "Good. Let's see if you can handle more than engines." The pilot lowered the stairway, and Richard climbed first. Cameras outside flashed wildly, reporters shouting questions as they caught sight of movement. But from their distance, they could not see clearly who was boarding. They would know soon enough. Emily's legs trembled as she followed Richard up the steps. The closer she got to the door, the louder her heartbeat grew. She had imagined this moment when she was a child, walking onto a jet, not as a passenger, but as someone who belonged to the world of aviation. But reality was heavier, filled with more fear and doubt. Inside, the jet gleamed with wealth. Soft leather seats, golden trims, glowing lights, it was like stepping into another world. Emily's fingers brushed the side of the doorway as she entered, almost to convince herself it was real. Richard gestured to one of the seats. "Sit." She obeyed, sitting stiffly, afraid to even touch anything. The jet hummed louder as the pilot prepared for takeoff. Guards settled in at the back, watching her carefully, their suspicions still strong. But Richard ignored them, lowering himself into his seat across from Emily. He studied her like a puzzle, his sharp eyes catching every movement. "You're not afraid?" he asked. Emily looked at him, her lips tightening. "I've been through worse." Richard leaned back, his expression unreadable. But something in his gaze softened for a second. He respected honesty, even when it was sharp. The engines roared, the jet rolling down the runway. The force pushed Emily back into her seat, her stomach twisting. For a moment, fear clawed at her chest. She had not been on a plane since before her parents died. The sound, the vibration, it all dragged her into memories she didn't want to face. She gripped the armrest tightly, her nails digging into the leather. Richard noticed. He spoke quietly, his voice steady against the roar. Breathe. Don't fight the sky. Let it carry you. His words surprised her. They weren't the words of a ruthless billionaire, but of someone who understood the storm inside her. She closed her eyes, forcing her lungs to calm, and slowly the fear loosened its grip. The jet lifted off the ground. The city lights fell away, shrinking until they looked like fallen stars. Clouds embraced the wings, and the endless sky opened before them. Emily's breath caught. For the first time in years, she was flying again. Not from behind a fence, not in a memory, but here, in the present, touching the sky she had thought she lost forever. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide, but Richard saw them. He said nothing, but his gaze lingered on her face for a long time. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the steady hum of engines. Finally, Richard spoke. Tell me, Emily. Why did you really fix my jet tonight? Was it pride? Was it desperation? Or something else? Emily's throat tightened. She looked down at her hands, stained with grease. I fixed it because I couldn't watch it die. Machines like this, they're not just metal and wires. They're alive, in their own way. They carry people, dreams, memories. My father used to say a jet carries more than passengers, it carries hope. And when I saw yours dying, I couldn't let it. Not again. Her voice cracked on the last words. She quickly wiped her eyes, ashamed. Richard leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. Not again? Emily froze. She had said too much. Memories rushed back, the accident, the loss, the projects she had worked on before her world collapsed. She shook her head, trying to hold it in. But Richard's voice cut through the air like a blade. Tell me. She looked at him, her eyes filled with both fear and defiance. I lost everything once. My family. My future. My work. I couldn't save any of it. But tonight, when I fixed your jet, for the first time, it felt like I saved something. Like maybe I wasn't broken too. The guard shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to hear. But Richard Kane's stare never left her. For a long moment, he was silent, as if weighing every word she had spoken. Then, slowly, he nodded. You did save something, he said firmly. And I don't forget people who save me. Emily blinked, stunned. The jet soared higher, stars bright against the windows. Below them, the world stretched small and distant. And inside, two lives, one born in wealth, one born again from ashes, sat facing each other, bound by a strange, fragile thread of trust. Richard leaned back in his seat, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. This is not the end, Emily. Tonight was only the first test. From here, the world will see you. They will question you. They will try to break you. But if you are what I think you are, you'll rise. Emily looked out the window, her reflection framed against the stars. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe her life wasn't over. Maybe this was the moment her new story began. The jet cut through the night sky, steady and strong. The moment of flight was not just about engines, it was about lives taking off. The jet cut across the clouds like a blade of silver. The world below had vanished into darkness, while the stars above glowed brighter, as if they had gathered to witness this night. Inside the cabin, silence stretched heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the engines. Emily sat quietly by the window, her face half lit by the glow of the cabin lights. For the first time in years, she was not looking up at the sky from the cold streets, she was part of it. Her reflection in the glass startled her. She didn't look like the invisible girl who used to beg for coins near the airport fence. She looked different now. Not polished, not wealthy, not glamorous, but alive, present, and with a spark in her eyes she thought had died long ago. Richard Kane watched her from across the cabin. The billionaire was known for being ruthless, a man who crushed competitors without hesitation. Yet tonight, his sharp eyes softened whenever they landed on the girl who had done the impossible. He had seen countless people chase his money, fake their loyalty, or beg for his favor. But this girl had asked for none of it. She had only asked for a chance to prove herself, to save a machine, to hold on to something that mattered. "Emily," Richard said at last, his deep voice pulling her from her thoughts. "You know what fixing that jet really means, don't you?" She turned to him, confused. "It means I did my job. I brought it back to life." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze sharp as glass. "No. It means the world is going to know your name. The media is already outside. They've seen you. By tomorrow, they'll dig into your past. They'll want to know who you are, why you succeeded where the best engineers failed. You're not invisible anymore. Are you ready for that?" Emily froze. She hadn't thought that far. For years, she had lived in the shadows, unseen, unwanted. Now the idea of people asking her name, knowing her story, it terrified her. I don't know if I'm ready." Richard's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a rare edge of warmth. "Nobody is ever ready. But the sky doesn't wait for anyone. It forces you to rise, or it leaves you behind." She looked down at her hands, still blackened with grease, still trembling from all she had gone through. A part of her wanted to run, to vanish back into the shadows where nobody could hurt her. But another part, the part that had pushed her to step forward tonight, to challenge the billionaire himself, wanted to stay, to fight, to finally belong. "Then I'll rise," she whispered. Richard nodded once, satisfied. The jet cabin fell into quiet again, but it was no longer uncomfortable. There was a strange understanding between them now, like two travelers who had met at the edge of a storm. Hours later, the jet began its descent. Through the windows, the first light of dawn stretched across the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson. The city below glowed alive, its towers shining like fire against the morning haze. Emily's chest tightened. She had not seen a sunrise from the sky since she was a child. She pressed her hand to the window, her eyes wet but unblinking. For the first time, the rising sun didn't feel like something distant and unreachable. It felt like a promise. The jet touched down smoothly, wheels kissing the runway with grace. Outside, the tarmac was alive with flashing cameras, reporters shouting, and curious eyes waiting. News had already spread that Kane's billion-dollar jet had been repaired overnight, but nobody knew how. The stairway lowered. Guards moved first, creating a shield, but Richard raised his hand to stop them. "Not this time. Let them see." He stood, fixing his suit, and then turned to Emily. "Walk with me." Emily's breath caught. "With you? But they're here for you, not me." Richard's eyes narrowed, his tone commanding. "They're here for both of us. The world loves a story it cannot explain. And tonight, you are that story." Her knees weakened, but she followed him. Step by step, they walked down the stairway together. Cameras flashed wildly, voices rose, questions flew like arrows. "Mr. Kane, what happened? Who is she? Is this your new engineer? Is she the reason your jet is flying again?" Richard didn't answer. He only raised his hand slightly, and the noise fell quiet. Then, in front of the world, he said the words that would change Emily's life forever. "This jet is flying because of her. When the best failed, when the strongest gave up, this girl fixed what nobody else could. Remember her face. Remember her name. Emily is the reason we're standing here." The crowd erupted. Reporters pushed forward, snapping pictures, shouting her name, trying to grab her words. Emily stood frozen, stunned by the weight of it. For so long she had been a ghost, ignored by the world. Now the world was chasing her. She opened her mouth but no words came. The noise, the lights, the attention, it was overwhelming. But then, she felt Richard's hand lightly touch her shoulder, steady and grounding. She looked up at him, and he gave a rare, almost invisible nod. So she spoke. Her voice was quiet at first, then stronger. I was nobody. I was forgotten. But tonight, I proved that sometimes, even those the world throws away still carry something worth saving. Machines can be fixed. But so can people. Don't forget that. The crowd went silent for a breath, as if struck by her words. Then the noise returned louder than before, echoing across the runway. For Emily, it was overwhelming, but it was also freeing. The chains of silence she had worn for years had broken. The world knew her now. Later, after the noise faded and the reporters were kept at a distance, Richard and Emily stood near the edge of the runway. The city lights flickered in the distance, the jet gleaming proudly behind them. Richard spoke quietly, almost like a secret. You have two choices now, Emily. You can walk away, vanish, and the world will forget in time. Or you can stay, step into the fire, and claim the life you should have had. Which will it be? Emily looked at the jet, then at the endless sky above it. Her past flashed before her eyes, the cold nights on the streets, the hunger, the loneliness, the memories of her parents' voices telling her she was meant for more. She took a deep breath. I won't vanish, she said softly, but with steel in her voice. Not again. This time, I'll fly. Richard's lips curved, not into a smirk, not into a cold smile, but into something real. Then welcome to your new life. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky in gold, Emily felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. It was fragile, yes, but it was alive, burning brighter than any engine she had ever touched. For the first time, the homeless girl who had been invisible found herself standing at the start of a future she never thought she'd have. And above her, the sky waited. Her new life had taken off.